When a murder's committed, it's always a race against time, to find the truth, to separate fact from fiction, to catch the killer, and to make sure that justice is served. But what happens when the truth vanishes with the victim? I'm Dr. Richard Shepherd, and I've spent my entire career as a forensic pathologist performing nearly 23,000 autopsies, including on some of the most high-profile cases of recent times. I've learned that the dead don't hide the truth, and they never lie. Through me, you'll be hearing directly from the victim.
From a state-of-the-art laboratory with groundbreaking technology that uses digitally scanned sample bodies,
I'll be investigating a series of intriguing murders where, from the victims' bodies, I'll be revealing to you the truth behind those horrific crimes.
the small historic fishing village of Mumbles sits on the outskirts of Swansea in South Wales. Its idyllic seaside setting is popular with tourists and is the gateway to the beautiful Gower Peninsula.
Leslie and Derek Potter, happily married and expecting their next grandchild, were at the heart of that close-knit community. Yet on the 7th of April 2018, Derek found Leslie dead. She'd apparently hung herself from a beam in their home. But had Leslie committed suicide, or had something more sinister occurred?
And could her body help reveal the truth? Leslie and Derek Potter lived together on a quiet street rising up behind the seafront.
Mumbles is definitely an aspirational place to live. The house prices here are quite sky high. Lots of people have second homes here. It's quite quiet, idyllic.
On the evening of Friday, 6th of April 2018, the Potter family were all out enjoying a meal at the George pub in Mumbles.
Leslie and Derek liked visiting different pubs in Mumbles that are quite close to their home. They visited the George pub with their children and grandchildren and had a family meal together. According to staff, everything seemed normal.
But the next morning, this happy family was torn apart. Derek got up earlier and made Leslie a cup of tea before heading out to run some errands. When he returned, his wife was not in bed. So he searched the house and found her in the back bedroom, hanging in an apparent suicide.
Derek said that morning he went out to go and collect some money that he was owed from a roofing job and was stuck in traffic in Mumbles for around 20 minutes and came back to find his wife hanging naked in the back room, which he referred to as his workshop. He called his daughter Nicole at 11:22 a.m. 2 minutes later, she called for an ambulance. After Derek hung up on his daughter, he called the emergency services, and when they asked him if he needed an ambulance, he said, no, the person is dead.
Only about half of the people who commit suicide actually leave a suicide note. Probably a way of revealing their inner turmoil and their desire to make the ultimate decision. In Leslie's case, no note was found. And when the police examined the scene, they found no suspicious circumstances and nothing to contradict Derek's story. So Leslie's body was taken to the local mortuary for a routine post-mortem examination. When she was examined, a noose was found on the body, and that would explain the marks that were found,
which I can show you on this sample body.
which are described as a 5 mm deep furrow to the front of the neck, but which also extended up the sides of the neck, up behind the ears on both sides. And these are typical of the marks caused by a ligature in hanging. Hanging causes death in a very particular way. It causes death by resulting in pressure to the nerves in the neck, particularly a nerve called the vagus nerve, which travels down and affects the heart. And stimulation of the vagus nerve by pressure causes the heart to stop. And so death can occur very quickly indeed in hanging. The pathologist who examined Leslie found no evidence to contradict Derrick's account. And so her body was released to the funeral directors for cremation.
Leslie's suicide stunned the family, who to the outside world had seemed to be so regular.
Leslie and Derrick Potter married in 1992 and have been together for 26 years. They had 3 children, 5 grandchildren, and 1 on the way.
This was their second marriage. I think Leslie came originally from Bristol, the West Country, but we don't really know much about her background or about his background, to be honest.
They had run a cafe together in Mumbles, and then in their later years together, Derrick became a carpenter / tradesman doing odd jobs and roofing and things like that.
Their daughter Nicole, who was 4 months pregnant, had recently become friends with a woman who lived locally.
I met Nicole in the pub. She started chatting to me first, and I make friends with everyone. I started talking to her, and ever since we became friends, quite good friends. We went out together a lot. We went partying, you know, we went to a friend's house, having parties there. So yeah, we went out quite a lot together.
Shortly after meeting Nicole, Natalia met her parents.
Leslie was a really happy person. She was kind, genuine person. I mean, she took me one day home and drove me all the way home, and she was really nice. We had a lovely chat, and she was looking forward to having another grandkid. I met Derrick first time in Nicole's house. I was sitting on the sofa, chatting to Nicole, just playing with Nicole's son. And then Derrick walks in through the door, and Derrick sits down, has a cup of tea, has a cigarette. Let's just say Derrick seemed interested in me, if you know what I mean. He seemed nice, but he was always at that point staring at me and looking at me. So I was a bit awkward at that time, and I was really quite wary about him. You know, just was interested in another younger woman, if you know what I mean.
When her mother was found dead, Nicole called Natalia.
Nicole was the first person that told me that Leslie committed suicide.
Nicole, Leslie's daughter, received that phone call from Derrick. She must have been in a complete state of shock.
Nicole was crying on the phone, and all I could say to her, anything at all, I'll be there for her.
How devastating it must have been for her to find out that her mother's died from suicide, and she was 4 months pregnant at the time. Terrible.
For Nicole, it was devastating. You know, Nicole was really, really sad.
Their shock was compounded by the fact there was no suicide note left by Leslie, explaining why she would take her own life.
When the emergency services arrived, Derrick claimed that he'd tried to revive her, but Leslie was found dead, naked, lying on a cabinet with the noose still round her neck. Police were there and questioned Derrick initially.
Sorry?
Door locked and you returned home?
Yeah.
You have to get in with the key, was it?
When police got there, they found Derrick Potter upset, although it was noted perhaps not as upset as you might expect. He wasn't crying.
Did you lock the door when you left, or did...
Yeah. Well, yeah, just pull it to the latch.
Paramedics straight away noted something odd. Leslie Potter was found naked, laying on a table in the workshop. And the paramedic who first responded said he'd been, sadly, to many hangings over the years, and he'd never seen a naked person hang themselves. But the scene was photographed, his account was taken, and then the body was taken away. There were no suspicious circumstances.
It just shows you never really know what's going on behind closed doors.
On the 7th of April 2018, Leslie Potter was found hanged at home in Mumbles, South Wales. She was found by her husband Derek, and her death seemed to come out of the blue.
Derek appeared quite calm when speaking with police officers.
How long were you married to Leslie for?
25 years, 26 years.
But the authorities had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss.
However, Leslie's body would have its own story to tell. Derek Potter had a troubled past. He had previous convictions, including violent offences.
People who were friends with Derek have reported in local press that after a few drinks that he became quite erratic and confrontational. In the years leading up to Leslie's death, Derek had actually given up drink and had tried to control that behaviour, but just before Leslie's death, according to her friends, he had started drinking again and was often seen frequenting the George pub with Leslie.
But by all accounts, Leslie seemed to be enjoying life.
Leslie was in a really good place. She was a really happy woman. She was over the moon that she was going to have another grandkid. Everything was normal with the family, as far as I know. Nicole never ever said that, you know, she argued with her family or anything like that.
Leslie did have some physical health issues.
She wasn't very well. She had massive arthritis on her fingers. She couldn't move her fingers really well. I think she had problems with her legs.
But 3 days before her death, she was out shopping and moving around without too much difficulty. The morning Leslie was found dead, Derek said she had come home from the shops upset.
He said that she had been to a pharmacy to get her pain medication, but had been denied the usual strong medication and was quite upset about this.
The pharmacy had no recollection of this. And Derek's accounts of his movements that morning appeared to have some holes in it.
Derek had said that on that morning he had been collecting money from a job and that he'd been stuck in traffic for 20 minutes in Mumbles. The CCTV from the area showed free-moving traffic. He was not stuck in traffic. No way.
Was there more to this death than suicide? Only Leslie's body could give any clues.
Derek told police he'd found Leslie hanging and he'd cut her down and laid her on the cabinet. He also said he'd performed CPR. When injuries from CPR are present, they're usually pretty obvious, and you find them in the muscles on the front of the chest. But also, when CPR has been performed with some force, you can find fractures of the breastbone and of the ribs, but it's all in the front of the chest. But sometimes no injuries are present at all, even though we know resuscitation has been performed. To see if any further injuries were present, a more detailed examination would have been necessary. But the routine examination raised no issues. They'd established a cause of death.
Asphyxiation by hanging.
and so no further questions were asked.
Still in a state of shock, Nicole and the family started preparing for the funeral. Nicole's friend Natalia was a huge support.
After Leslie died, Natalia offered her condolences to the family and offered her help in any way that she could. So she started doing some cleaning for the family, and eventually she helped Derek.
I was gonna clean Derek's house, so I offered to clean. I said to Derek, I don't want money because of your daughter, Nicole. I will just do anything I can to help. Derek started showing me around the house, and he took me to the room, and he literally said, this is where she hanged herself. I went out of the room because I felt I didn't want to stay in the room where a woman, Leslie, committed suicide. I got a bit freaked out about it. So I just left the room. I said, I'm going. There was something not right with Derek, but I didn't know what it was.
Natalia also helped Derek with some roofing work in the days leading up to the funeral.
I worked with Derek on the roof because Nicole said to me, can you please help my father to do a couple of jobs? And I wasn't scared to work on the roof because I've done roofing before. So I said, yes, I'll help out. "18
days after Leslie's body was found, they started the roofing work together.
We were on top of the roof, and Derek was already making kind of weird sayings to me. Like, I told Derek I broke up with my boyfriend, and he was like using a hammer and a nail and saying, oh, you should do this to your boyfriend. You know, I was a bit scared then, but I didn't think a lot of it.
After work, Derek invited Natalia for a drink.
Derek said, normal workers will go to the pub and we'll have, 1 or 2 pints. I said, okay, no problem. So, and he wasn't supposed to be drinking. I didn't know he was an alcoholic. He bought the first round. We drank it. I went to the bathroom, came back, and he already got me another one.
Several witnesses reported him and her in the pub, and this bear in mind, a few days after his wife had committed suicide. And he was seen with the woman laughing and joking. An attractive young woman, perhaps there's an element of flirting, whether he's trying to impress in some way, in the middle of the pub, amongst people who knew him and had known his wife.
And this is where the evening took a dark turn.
We were just sitting, drinking our drinks. Derek looked in my eyes and said to me, I need to tell you something.
Over 2 weeks had passed since Derek Potter's wife had allegedly committed suicide at home.
The post-mortem hadn't raised any issues, but had the right questions been asked of Leslie's body?
The funeral was a week away, and Derek was out having a drink with a work colleague, Natalia, when they had a conversation that she would never forget.
We were sitting together, me and Derek. Derek looked in my eyes and said to me, I need to tell you something. I said, what is it? He says, I strangled my wife.
After a few pints, 2 or 3 pints, not a huge amount, you would think, he confessed to murdering his wife. He just said, I loved my wife, but she was, as he said, doing my head in, and I strangled her. And I think initially she thought, he's joking. He's had a pint or 2, he's joking.
He was calm, he just looked straight in the eyes to me, and Derek was really calm. It's like he thought that he didn't do nothing wrong, it's fine,
Derek also asked Natalia not to mention anything to Nicole.
To me, it's clear that Derek Potter suffers from not just 1, not even just 2, but in fact 3 distinct personality disorders. I see signs of borderline personality, antisocial personality, and narcissistic personality here. But I think with Derek Potter, it's the way that his destructive components of his personality magnify each other and feed into each other, so that the lack of emotional regulation feeds into the sense of superiority and feeds into the disregard for other people.
It was a shock for me, literally. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to run, whether to sit there. I didn't believe it at first. I really didn't believe it. But Derek also said to me, I done this for you. As to say, I done this for you so you can move in, because I want to help you with everything. As that's what Derek's words were.
The only thing that drives him, the base that he operates from, is what is in his best interests in that moment.
Goodness knows what must have been going through Natalia's mind, because on one hand, he's just confessed to murder, and the next minute he's asking her to move in with him.
At that point, I thought that he wasn't lying. I said to Derek, I got my own place. I don't need help. So I was stressed out. I didn't know what to think. And I thought, if I was a stupid girl and I went and lived with him, what would happen to me?
He completely misjudged the situation with Natalia. He thought, from his narcissistic perspective, that she would understand why he had to do what he did, that she would understand that and be on his side, completely misreading the situation.
At the time that Derek and Natalia were at the pub, Leslie's body was at a chapel of rest. This confession to Natalia came at a really poignant time. It was the week before Leslie's funeral. So Natalia had a really big dilemma on her hands. If the family went ahead with the cremation, all possible evidence would be completely destroyed.
I said to Derek, look, I gotta go home. So I went home. I sat there for a while. Didn't know what to do, whether to report it to the police.
Natalia was in a state of panic.
I think 2 days, 48 hours I didn't sleep. My mind was going out. I was lost, I was. So I contacted my best friend, who's a lawyer, and she said to me, Natalia, it's best you report it. So it was something like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I phoned the police then, and obviously they came, they took me, and they interviewed me.
5 days after Derek confessed to Natalia, police arrested him for the murder of his wife, Leslie Potter.
So once the allegations had been put to the police about Potter's confession, he was arrested, and straight away he began to change his story. Even in the police car, on the way to the police station, he made comments about how he'd helped his wife, how he'd tied knots in the rope and helped her to end her own life.
The arresting officers pulled the car over and made a note of his remarks, which Potter signed 3 times.
I was relieved when Derek was arrested, because to be honest, if he did what Derek told me, it's not fair for a woman like Leslie to go and get cremated and then he's living a normal life knowing that he can do it to someone else.
I think he will have been surprised that Natalia reported his confession to her in the pub. He will have been shocked, because for him, he thought he was entitled to do what he was doing, and he was just explaining that to a woman that he was interested in and that he assumed, from his narcissistic perspective, was interested in him. It wouldn't have occurred to him that she would tell what he'd confessed to her.
But Natalia's actions did ultimately mean the end of her friendship with Leslie's daughter, Nicole.
At first, when I told Nicole I had to report her father to the police. Nicole was not happy. But I think Nicole and the family didn't want to think it was Derek. You know, they didn't look that way, maybe because Derek was so convincing. But I used to say to myself, the family is going to have to cope, because if it's the truth, they have to know who Derek was, you know, and it's just justice for Leslie as well.
The police now had a murder investigation on their hands.
On the 1st of May, which was only 3 days before Leslie's funeral was due to take place, the police intervened and her body was taken for a second post-mortem, a more detailed post-mortem, in Cardiff.
Derek claimed that when he'd found Leslie, she was already dead. She'd hanged herself. But given what he's just told Natalia, which story would be supported by the second post-mortem examination? Hanging leaves a particular mark across the skin of the neck, and ligature strangulation leaves a horizontal band on the skin and then the muscles underneath. But manual strangulation can produce bruising all over the muscles of the neck and even deeper. And the second post-mortem showed marks of bruising to the muscles of the neck. It showed evidence of bruising to the base of the tongue, and it showed evidence of bruising around the carotid artery to the sides of the neck. And even deeper than that, it was found that the larynx was fractured. This pattern of injuries is not consistent with ligature strangulation or hanging, but it is consistent with manual pressure to the neck. And so the second pathologist concluded that Leslie had been manually strangled.
And then hanged. Leslie's body had finally been given the opportunity to reveal the truth. And going back over the reports of the crime scene with a critical eye, some things were looking out of place.
Her body wasn't found directly below the noose. It was found on the other side of the room on top of a cabinet. And it was found that the noose was around her neck, but her hair was still tucked inside of the noose, which really struck a chord with the pathologist.
Natural instinct when putting anything around your neck, like a necklace, for instance, is to tuck it under your hair. Also, Leslie had been found naked, which is almost unheard of in suicide cases. These are all significant red flags, and while none of them on its own is critical, the three together strongly support the post-mortem findings. But during police interviews, Derek stuck to his story that Leslie had committed suicide.
Derek was in fact interviewed 12 times by police after his arrest, and many a story started being spun. At first, Derek talked about their sex life. He said that him and Leslie were very much into sadomasochism and that she had liked being strangled. He claimed that he'd strangled her 15 times in their relationship, some of them sexual and then some of them out of malice.
He tells the police that when he first sees her body hanging there, his first thought is, "You bitch." We know that he talks about her body as being like a sack of spuds. All of these give us just a glimpse into the depths of depravity of this man's personality, into the degree of damage that is deep within.
But Derek Potter was adamant that his wife had committed suicide and that he hadn't strangled her this time.
Derek also claimed that Leslie had often talked about suicide. He said that he'd offered to buy her heroin to make the process easier for her, that she was often in so much pain that that's why she wanted to go.
It's this seething combination of personality dysfunctions that produce somebody for whom remorse and guilt and any kind of finer feelings have almost been obliterated.
Derek was coming up with lots of excuses, but none of this really added up.
When Leslie Potter was found hanged at home, her husband Derek initially claimed that she'd committed suicide. Now he was charged with murder, and a full forensic post-mortem
Had allowed her body to tell the truth. She had been brutally murdered by strangulation.
everything he told the police was a lie, and the lies just kept on coming.
He initially told police that his wife had been depressed, also suffering with severe arthritis, was in pain, and couldn't take any more, had reached the end of her tether. And straight away he began to change his story, and over the course of several interviews, he just spanned story after story after story, claiming his wife had taken her own life and then had died in some kind of autoerotic sex game.
Derek was coming up with lots of excuses and lots of different stories of where he was that day and how Leslie was feeling, but something wasn't quite adding up. All these stories didn't make sense.
It was clear that Leslie hadn't hanged herself as Derek had claimed, and that something far more malicious had occurred. In addition to the revelation that Leslie had been manually strangled and then hanged, other injuries showed that a substantial struggle had also taken place. The Home Office pathologist identified over 30 areas of bruising and grazing externally on her arms and on her neck and on her legs and on her back. He also found that there were 30 fractures of her ribs, 2 of them to the back, and some ribs had been fractured more than once, and these injuries were not consistent with simple resuscitation. Furthermore, he found evidence of bruising deep within the abdominal cavity. And this type of bruising is consistent with severe force being applied to the abdomen, such as stamps and kicks. He described these injuries as extreme, and he said they were consistent with having been caused at about the time of death. It was concluded that there was no evidence that Derek had ever attempted to resuscitate his wife. Instead, he'd spent the time trying to stage the cover-up. This was clearly a very violent death, with widespread and severe injuries. Injuries that were not of the sort that could have been caused during a suicide attempt.
On Monday, the 22nd of October 2018, Derek appeared at Swansea Crown Court, charged with murder. Natalia gave evidence against him.
It was very nerve-wracking when Derek was there because I had to obviously see him through the glass. The police did say to me, do you want him to be, like, do you want a board in front of you so you don't have to see Derek? And I said, no, why shall I? Why shall I hide myself from him? Why shall I? But no, I looked in his eyes, I did. Every time I answered the question to the judge, I just looked in Derek's eyes. Derek was looking at me as well as to probably say, why did you do this to me? I felt like he was angry. His face was very angry. But I just kept on staring at him and answering the questions.
Then it was Derek's turn to take the stand.
He gave a very strange performance in the witness box throughout his 3 days of giving evidence. He was boastful. He talked about his sexual prowess and his crazy sex life, number of sexual partners, number of marriages he's had, how strong he was. He seemed to enjoy being in the witness box.
One of Derek's claims of why Leslie had maybe killed herself was that it was a sex game gone wrong, that they were both into strangulation and she was trying to strangle herself and surprise him when he came back from collecting money, but it had gone wrong.
He came out with some bizarre claims. He claimed he had healing powers in his hands. It was a strange performance in the box, not what you typically see of somebody facing such a grave charge. He seemed to want to take on the barristers and to prove himself. I think he thought he was really clever and he wanted to take them on and beat them. And that rarely ends well for a defendant.
The way Potter behaves in trial is really quite hard to understand. This apparently reasonably intelligent man is spinning all sorts of implausible stories.
Part of the story, or part of the stories which Potter told involved a lodger that he and Leslie had in their Mumbles home by the name of Paul. And he claimed both he and Leslie had been in love with Paul and had been involved in a three-way sexual relationship involving role-playing and all kinds of sexual games. He claimed that his wife was depressed after the death of Paul, and that was part of the suicide. We don't know anything about that, whether Paul even existed. It could well just be another story spun by him. His own barrister called him a fantasist.
What we've got here is somebody who's really not a very good liar, if you will, which may be surprising, but actually, to be a good liar, you have to be aware of other people in order to present your story in an effective way. You have to care what other people think. He didn't.
You can only imagine how hard it was for the family to have to sit in court and to hear lies, lie after lie after lie that Potter told, spinning these outrageous lies about her, some outlandish stories. It must have been heartbreaking, heartbreak upon heartbreak.
As well as insisting Leslie had committed suicide, Derek Potter pointed the finger at other people as well.
He also tried to blame Leslie's murder on his son-in-law, on the Masons, and on drug dealers. The stories were getting quite out of hand.
It's all sorts of bizarre conspiracy theories he's drawing in. It reminds me of a child caught out lying. And I think that if you understand that this is a man who his entire life has never justified himself to anybody. That's not his personality. And now here he is, suddenly finding himself, realizing that actually he is having to answer for his actions. So we see him reacting, to my mind, like a young child with these unsophisticated, frankly ridiculous lies.
But Leslie's body had told the truth and revealed the facts.
The trial turned on the forensic post-mortem evidence, which was vital for the prosecution case, because there was no witness evidence, no CCTV. It all came down to the post-mortem, the detailed forensic evidence from that, which was laid out to the jury in great detail during the trial.
No explanation of a motive was ever proven in court.
We heard quite a bit of evidence in the trial about Derek Potter's temper. We heard from a number of colleagues, former colleagues, who testified to outbursts of temper. And even in the witness box, Potter himself talked about his temper. He recounted one bizarre story where he said he'd strangled a man on holiday who'd annoyed him, almost in a boastful way. How he turned on this man and strangled him because he'd said something or something had been done which annoyed him, which for a man accused of a loss of temper and strangling his wife was a strange thing to say.
To the extent that there was a trigger, I think it was this. Leslie was becoming increasingly arthritic and suffering and aging. For Derek, he resented the way that this impacted on him and reflected on him in a bad light. And I think to the extent that there was a trigger, that was it.
The trial lasted 2 weeks, and throughout, Derek Potter took no responsibility for what had happened to Leslie.
Potter maintained his innocence right to the end. He showed no remorse at all for what he'd done. Sought to blame others. It was a shameless performance in the box, and not a hint of remorse from him for the death of his wife of 26 years.
Remorse is not a big part of Derek Potter's personality. He will have had moments of grief, for sure, but this is a man who has for years thought and felt in ways that are all about himself, that are all about hatred, that are all about disregard for other people. So yes, there will have been moments, but moments is all it will have been.
On Tuesday, the 6th of November, the jury delivered their verdict.
Throughout the trial, Potter maintained his innocence. To the end, he denied murdering his wife and just put forward a series of lies and tall tales to try and cover his tracks. But I think the jury saw through it straight away, and the prosecution case was so strong, particularly the post-mortem medical evidence, that told a very different story.
So when it came to the jury's deliberations, they unanimously decided that Derek was guilty in just over an hour, in 1 hour, 7 minutes to be precise. The jury of 8 men, 4 women, all decided that he was guilty of murder.
2 days later, the Honourable Mr. Justice Sewell sentenced him.
When passing his sentence, the judge described the attack on Leslie Potter as a ferocious attack and said that what Potter did next, with the lies he told, was a despicable and shameful charade that clearly had caused the family even more distress.
The judge stated that Potter had strangled his wife without premeditation in a sudden and furious burst of temper.
I think the judge accepted, and it was argued in the case, that it wasn't a planned murder, as it was a spontaneous outburst of anger. But while the murder wasn't planned, what happened next clearly was. And he'd gone to the trouble of staging his wife's suicide.
He's not somebody who gives a great deal of thought to other people, so he won't have given a great deal of thought to whether or not he was going to get away with it. He's just acting from his own immediate, selfish impulses. What he does is an instinctive product of his disordered personality, of his dysfunctional personality.
Derek Potter was sentenced to life in prison and will have to spend at least 17 years in jail.
When they sentenced Derek, I was so chuffed. I was so chuffed, and I went out of the court and just prayed for Leslie and say, you know, I done a good job. I done it for you.
After the hearing, the police family liaison officer made a statement on behalf of the family.
Not only have we had to come to terms with the fact that he so cruelly killed our mother, but we have had to listen to him tarnishing her name throughout the investigation and the court case.
The families, they didn't really want to speak publicly, but I thought that was a really touching sentiment. They felt their mother gone, and her memory was now being tarnished by what her husband of 26 years was now saying about her, and the lies he was saying about her. I think 2 things really stood out for me from this case. One was the strength of the medical evidence, which told the true story of what happened that day, not the lies which Potter told. And also the pub confession, without which there would have been no detailed post-mortem. So together, I think they made for an unusual case, quite unlike any case I've covered before.
The only thing that I'm struck by is the way that somehow Leslie Potter managed to be married to this man for 26 years without something like this happening before. And I think that speaks of the patience, resilience, adaptability, and humbleness of this woman, that she managed to manage somebody as destructive and damaged as Derek Potter through a 26-year marriage.
With the trial over, Leslie's family could finally grieve for their loss.
If Natalia had not plucked up the courage to report what Derek said to her in that pub that day, this could so nearly have been the story of a man who got away with murder.
But Leslie's body showed that she had been subjected to a violent attack, strangled to death, and then hanged. So it's a
Prime example of the fact that the body always tells the truth. But you do have to ask the right question.